ever had something really stay with you? It might be a poem, or a story, or a movie, something that you watched, or read, or heard, and for whatever reason, you kept coming back to it, thinking about it long after that story was over. And maybe you liked that story, or you didn't. You found it deeply resonant or deeply troubling. But it was a story that kept coming to you, maybe even without your willing it to happen. Okay, imagine it's 2009. I'm going to date myself. I was 25 years old. And I was living in the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, I don't often tell these stories because those of you who spend a lot of time around me know, especially Steph, it's Janet here, she knows, I tell really slow stories. Takes a long time. And so when I'm telling stories from my time in Palestine, you've got layers of culture, geopolitical situations, and just the story itself. It takes way too long. But this, I think, is a relatable story about books. We had in our little house a bookshelf, maybe so big, so tall, 2 shelves, you know, the laminate plywood, and all of our books were on those 2 shelves. And my work as a human rights worker in the village of At-Tawani was very odd, and it had moments of intense activity and a good deal of boredom. So I did what I often do when I'm in need of refuge or imagination. I read. I read a lot. I read a lot of fiction. I read through all of the Harry Potter series, The Lord of the Rings twice, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Got through all of those. There were nonfiction books on the geopolitical situation in Palestine. I couldn't read it and live it at the same time, so those were off the table. And at that point, I had read through many of the books in our house. I tried for the first time in my life a romance novel. That didn't last long. I needed to move on, find something different. And one of my colleagues brought with them when they flew in the first book of the Twilight series. The details of that plot aren't important. It didn't really resonate with me either, but luckily, one of my friends and coworkers started to read the book at about the same time. And we didn't get too much entertainment out of the book itself, but we really enjoyed the story. We enjoyed the story so much that we started retelling it, moving the characters around, imagining different people. It was kind of a romance novel, so different people were dating other people. Anyway, we would read it out loud to each other in silly voices. It helped to pass the time. It was a story that unwillingly became a part of our friendship and kind of a part of us. And I was thinking about that struggle with that story that both of us thought were pretty silly and didn't like that much. I was thinking about that when I was reading the first assigned gospel for my preaching as a priest, the Transfiguration. Those of you, again, staff know, and some of my friends know that I don't really know what to do with the story of the Transfiguration in general, because what is there to say, it seems, about shiny Jesus on a mountain? A lot of much brighter minds than I, and far more sanctified and holy, have said all that I ever could possibly say, I thought, about the Transfiguration. But then I was thinking about this lost art in sacred storytelling. It's an art that comes to us from our Jewish siblings. It's called midrash. And it's a way of taking a story that maybe troubles or puzzles us or just ignites our imagination. And you take that story and you play with it. You ask questions. You wonder. I'll give you an example. There's a midrash about the first person who stepped into the Red Sea after the waters parted. Have you ever thought about that? Would you be the first one? What would that be like? So we have this gift of a midrash that tells that person's story. I'm not going to spoil that one for you. You can look it up. Maybe wait till after the sermon to Google it. Thanks. So I was thinking about this story of the Transfiguration, and I was wondering what I could wonder about it. And there's this part of the story that has always bewildered me because I took it at its word. The part where Jesus tells the disciples not to tell anybody about it, I always assumed, for whatever reason, that the disciples listened to Jesus and did exactly what he said, because that's what the disciples obviously had a track record of doing. So as I was reading the text this time through, I realized Jesus tells them, don't tell anybody. So what do you think they did? They had to tell somebody. They had to. But I don't think they would have told the other disciples. That would have been a little obvious. Would have gotten back to Jesus. They couldn't have told maybe their friends that were outside of the circle of followers of Jesus, because Jesus was revolutionary and weird enough, and nobody really knew what to do with him. So it would have been too hard to tell that story. Would have taken a really long time. I think they told the women. The women in that day, first of all, probably didn't count for much. Secondly, last week we heard in the lectionary about the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. So we know Peter, at least, was married. I think Peter went home and told his wife about what happened. And I think Peter's wife, Peter might have said, don't tell anybody, and she was like, sure, I won't. So of course, she went to the women, and she told the women this story. And the women, among each other, told the story and told the story. They told the story when they were baking bread. They told the story when they were cooking large meals for their family or guests. They told the story when they gathered together at the village well and drew water. They told the story and told the story and told the story until the story became a part of them. And then, when the going got tough, the tough told stories. We're getting ready for Lent. We're getting ready to prepare ourselves for the chaos and the fear, eventually, of Jesus' betrayal and death. And on those fateful days, guess who stuck with Jesus? At the betrayal, at the cross, as he died, at the tomb. It was the women. The women stayed because they had this story of glory that was inside of them. Because we all know that these transcendent, glorious moments never last long enough, right? All too soon, there's fear and chaos and betrayal. Things go sideways, not according to plan. But we have a story. We have a story of glory that we can tell. And I want to talk about, for a minute, that glorious story. Because again, it's easy to take the Transfiguration and make it this mystical experience about the divine Jesus. But I wonder, have you ever really seen somebody? Or been seen by somebody? Like, really seen? It probably doesn't happen often. It might be just a glimpse, a moment, an instant on a mountaintop that all too soon you have to come down from. But hopefully, you have that moment of seeing or being seen, or maybe a little bit of both. I mean, I know for me that happened yesterday and throughout my ordination process of being seen. That's what, to me, ordination really is. Being seen and affirmed by the community of faith for my calling and my vocation. But here's where I think the church has a tendency to get it wrong and maybe has a bit to apologize for. Because it's not just about ordaining priests or clergy. That we as a Christian community live out our vocation best when we really see one another. I understand that not everybody is going to have an ordination with the bishop and the laying on of hands, but wouldn't it be beautiful if we were a community that practiced seeing each other, naming each other's gifts, telling each other the stories that we see as we live out our lives together in community? Wouldn't it be a gift if we saw each other transfigured, named the gifts in one another, called those forth, and celebrated them together as a community? In a way, I think everybody ought to get ordained. Not to this vocation, but to our vocation, your vocation. Whatever that may be, it may be for a moment or a lifetime. I don't even rightly know what that looks like. But we have this story of glory. And I think when the disciples saw Jesus transfigured, they just really saw him for who he was. And that has not changed over the last 2,000 years. We are still called to see Christ in one another, and we are called to see the real gifts and the real humanity in each other and in ourselves. We're called to tell those stories of glory to ourselves and to each other. And I don't know fully what the future of the church holds, but I do know that as we go bravely forward in the 21st century, we are called to be a community of faith, hope, and love that sees and transfigures one another with God's help. Amen.